it's famously irrefutable, right? There's no proof you could bring to actually prove to me that you exist and that you're not a hallucination or an illusion or a simulation that's created by some technology. And so that's the point. So if you're not living in doubt and anxiety about whether I exist or not, then it shows you, why are you applying your skepticism, radical skepticism, to the existence of God? So the point that I make is that there are different things somebody can be skeptical about, right? You can be a reality skeptic, which we call a solipsist. You can be skeptical about the existence of moral good and bad. So in the article, I bring a quote from a philosopher, Richard Garner, who says we should be moral abolitionists. We should abolish the concept of good and bad because there's no proof that good and bad exist, right? If the universe is just particles, then there's just different arrangements of particles, and it's just an arbitrary preference. We shouldn't say that this is morally good and morally bad. Morality itself doesn't exist. So you can be a reality skeptic. You can be a morality skeptic. You can be skeptical about causality. You can be skeptical about historical events in time and say, oh, you know what? The moon landing never happened, or this never happened, right? And create your whole conspiracy. Why is it that conspiracy theories don't go away, no matter how much evidence you get? So in the same way that you can be a morality skeptic, reality skeptic, you can be a God skeptic as well.
Right.
And if you haven't decided what would constitute acceptable proof to you, then your claim that there's no proof for the existence of God is meaningless, right? And that's a really important point. So there was one debate I remember watching between a theist and an atheist. And the theist was a psychologist, so he had kind of a unique way of going about it. So when the atheist said, you know, prove to me that God exists, the theist said, well, hold on a second. What would you accept as proof? And the atheist said, well, I would have to see God directly. And that's when the theist said, if you saw God directly, if you literally saw God, would you actually then believe? And the atheist was like, no, I'd probably think I'm having a bad hangover. And that's very interesting because, you know, the Quran actually mentions something very similar to that.
I remember when I read that was a really powerful verse.
So in Surah Al-Hijr, the 15th chapter of the Quran, Allah mentions, وَلَوْ فَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ بَابًا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ فَظَلُّوا فِيهِ يَعْرُجُونَ لَقَالُوا إِنَّمَا سُكِّرَتْ أَبْصَارُنَا بَلْ نَحْنُ قَوْمٌ مَسْحُورُونَ. If we were to open up the gates of the heavens, right, and they were to ascend up into them, or in another explanation, they saw the angels ascending into them, and they would just say, you know, we're hallucinating, where our eyes are bewitched. They still wouldn't believe. And there's many, many passages in the Quran that emphasize this. No matter how much evidence you provide. In another passage in Surah Al-An'am, the 6th chapter, it mentions that even if the dead were to speak to them, وَحَشَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ, and we gathered for them all the evidences and miracles that they requested, they still wouldn't believe, right? مَا كَانُوا لِيُؤْمِنُوا إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. They still wouldn't believe unless God willed. So is the problem actually an inadequacy in the proof, or is the problem a mindset that is not going to admit any proof because it's already concluded that it's uncomfortable with the notion that there is a God? So a person needs to challenge their own epistemology and say, why am I a God skeptic and not a reality skeptic? What reason do I have to be one and not the other?
Right. Okay, so I think that's a very good starting point for us. Now, by the way, for the viewers who don't know what certain things mean, please do ask us. We'll be happy to kind of explain them. So realism, simply put, just means whether that thing is real or not. So moral realism is you agree that there are such things as morals, right? Theistic realism is you believe that, you know, entities of God or associated like things are real. So that's what realism. The contrast of that is anti-realism. They don't exist, right? So if I'm a moral anti-realist, I don't believe there are things that are good and bad. So just keep that at the back of your mind, right? So, Dr. Nazir, how now then do you begin with? So let's start off on the basic roots, historically speaking. Pyrrhonian skepticism, right? So there's a really good book. It's called The Critical Introduction to Skepticism. It was published by Bloomsbury, and it highlights 7 different kinds of skepticism. Why are you focusing particularly on Pyrrhonian skepticism? What's so unique about this?
Yeah, so in general, like if you study ancient Greece and you study this Hellenistic period in ancient Greece, so the Hellenistic period is, roughly speaking, it's about like 2,300 years ago, right? So you look at this period in ancient Greece, and you look at the different schools. So they had different schools of thought in ancient Greece and different debates. There's a common theme in multiple in these different debates. So you had the Sophists, right? So the Sophists, and that's going to come up later when we talk about what Ibn Taymiyyah is talking about. The Sophists are famous for for the skeptical nature of their discussion. So. For example, you have people like Protagoras, Antiphon, Gorgias, Prodicus, Thrasymachus. What was famous about the Sophists? These are like super early thinkers in ancient Greece philosophy. Protagoras is famous for the statement, "Man is the measure of all things." And he expressed his skepticism of the divine when he said, "Where the gods are concerned, I'm not in a position to ascertain that they exist or that they do not exist." The main theme that you get from the Sophists in that early period of ancient Greek philosophy is this idea that of relativism. Okay, so things are equally true. So you bring an argument, Shoaib, and you tell me that you believe this, and somebody else brings me an argument, and they tell me they believe something different. You say you believe in X, the other person says they believe in Y, and I'm in the middle, and I say, there's arguments for this one, there's arguments for that one, and you can never really know. It's all relative. It's all relative at the end of the day. So there's an element of skepticism in that. The reason why I focus on Pyrrhonian skepticism is Pyrrho is the one thinker who really took skepticism to its ultimate conclusion. Okay, so if we kind of zoom in on Pyrrhonian skepticism, and there's a few interesting exercises we can use to understand this.
Is this your article?
Sorry?
Is this your article? You want me to zoom in the table?
No. We'll come in on that later. I'm just focusing on Pyrrho. Okay, so Pyrrho of Elis, so he died 270 BC, and he's it's said that he served under Alexander the Great. He traveled around the world, and presumably he interacted with different cultures, right? He traveled to India, and he returns to Greece, and he takes philosophy to such an extent where he affirmed that you really have to be skeptical of everything, demand proof for everything, and then what's the next step? You just distrust everything. How can I know for sure what you're saying is true or what somebody else is saying? How can I know your argument is better than that person's argument? And you provide another argument for that. How do I know about that, right? So what's said about him, and some of these are fables that people told about him, but they say he became so skeptical that his students had to hold him back from walking off cliffs, and they had to hold him back from walking into barking dogs, right? Because he would say, "Oh, I see that there's a cliff there, but how do I know it's not an illusion?" Right? Like when you're driving on a long stretch of road and you see that mirage of water on the road ahead, and you're like, "Oh, is it real or is it not? Is there actually a puddle there or is there not?" Right? So he took that to the ultimate conclusion. He would say, "Oh, I see a barking dog. How do I know it's not a cat?" And so he distrusted his senses to the extent that he literally posed danger to his own life because of its radical skepticism. Now, there's a great example of what it would be like to live your life as a Pyrrhonian skeptic on Rational Wiki. And so I just want to go through this because it's humorous, but it also gives you a vivid illustration. So imagine you wake up. Okay, and when you wake up, you're now a Pyrrhonian skeptic. So you have to say, did I really just wake up? Or am I imagining that I've woken up? How do I know I was ever asleep in the first place? How do I know that being asleep and being awake are actually different things? And then you get out of bed and say, how do I know this is actually a bed? How do I know I'm standing? I could be sitting or lying down for all I know. How do I know I was ever in this so-called bed to begin with? Then you look around the room and you say, how do I know this is even a room? How do I know it's mine? How do I know it's my room? How do I know that I'm doing an action called looking? You walk into the bathroom. Is there really a bathroom? There's no proof for that. How do I know I'm not still in the bedroom? How do I know that the bedroom ever existed in the first place? Right? There's this idea of implanted false memories. How do I know that the universe didn't come into existence 6 seconds ago and my brain formed with the memories that I have now, which makes me think that I've lived for so many years, right? So once you go down the path of radical skepticism, you can demand proof for anything. And if you think about it, most people, on a daily basis, we're accepting conclusions. We're dealing with knowledge without using radical skepticism, without demanding philosophical proofs, right? If somebody says, does your mother love you? Do your children love you, right? And a person says, yeah, my children love you. Oh, prove to me that, and then you start going down this pathway and you say, I need physical, tangible evidence. Did you conduct a study? Did you prove this? Nobody does that, right? Because there's certain conclusions that arise intuitively in the human mind as a result of what's meaningful. And that's the alternative I'm getting towards, right? We shift out of what's philosophically provable based on some indubitable syllogistic argument. A syllogistic argument, I should explain, is this logical deductive argument where you have a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion, right? Yeah. And that's how people approach the topic of belief in God. And Ibn Taymiyyah comes along and says, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That's not how we acquire knowledge about anything, right? That's not what we're doing normally when we acquire knowledge. So why are we creating this fictitious, fabricated standard of what is real, and then using that for God? And we don't apply that to morality. We don't apply it to reality. We don't apply it to anything else in existence.
Right. So in short, Dr. Nazir, you're saying is that Pyrrhonian skepticism is first of all, it's completely unrealistic, because if you walk with that, you can't even walk with that literally. Yeah. Right. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is,
not only is it unrealistic, it's actually self-defeating and self-contradictory. Because if you really think about it, and I mentioned this in the article, and it's that quote that somebody pointed out earlier about Descartes. So you get to a point, because Descartes, he wanted to be fully certain about things. So he said, let's forget everything and just go back to what we're certain of. And he said, I think, therefore I am, right? Cogito ergo sum. So I must know for sure, at the very least, I must know that I exist, right? But now people have pointed out you can apply skepticism even to that. You can get to mental state skepticism, where you're not sure if your thoughts are your own, or whether your thoughts mean what you think they mean. And so if you actually do that, you can say, how do I even know that my thoughts are meaningful? How do I know that my thoughts have the meanings I associate with them, and that the second thought actually does connect to the first thought? So when you do that, you can be skeptical about logic. You can be skeptical about any cognitive activity happening in your mind. So you get to this point, and that's why I made that statement that instead of saying cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, he should have said dobito ergo sum stultum, right? Which is, I doubt, therefore I remain foolish.
So that was, I think, Sana Khan's point earlier on. So I think so just to kind of capsize, it's unrealistic. It's self-defeating, Pyrrhonian skepticism. And it's also there's a double standard that at least contemporary critics of religion kind of point out here, right? They apply this absolutely ridiculous standard for believing in God's existence, but don't apply it to anywhere else. Whereas even if you think about it, if you adopt Pyrrhonian skepticism, even atheistic thoughts themselves are open to question, right? Yeah. So I think that's is that where you're coming from? Would that be correct? An apt summary?
Absolutely. And so maybe at this point it'd be good to show the table and explain what is atheism and how does atheism relate to skepticism.
Yeah. Before I do, I just wanted to share one thing. Can everybody see